welcome to the Countering Impacts of Sea Level Rise on the Everglades breakout session. And so my name is Mary Carter. I'm the Education Coordinator for the Arthur R. Marshall Foundation for the Everglades. And it's my pleasure to introduce the speakers for today. So they've actually all stand and join me. We have 5 presenters today, and all of these young ladies are our summer interns this year. And so I'll just quickly run through their names, but they will introduce themselves again, so you can definitely get them. But we have Lexi Liu, Jackie Dell, Hayana El Oliveira, Trinity Livingston, and Lacey Hancock. So these are all of our summer interns this year, and they've been tasked in the course of 11 weeks to research how is the Everglades going to be impacted by sea level rise. But I didn't just give them that task, because that wasn't enough work. Then I asked them to look at recommendations on how we maybe can solve some of those problems. And so without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Hayana, who is our first presenter.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hayana. And as Mary told us, we are going to present a literature review on countering impacts of sea level rise on the Everglades. And first, I'm going to give a little bit of a background. First, we get to know the Everglades. For the most intimate, the river of grass, it's highly dependent on water. The watershed comprehends the KOA system, Kissimmee chains of lakes, right here, the Lake Okeechobee, southern Everglades, and finally reaching Florida Bay. As you can see in the image, the flow of water moves really slowly and it's distributed in a big area. It's what we call a sheet flow. The habitats in the southern Everglades, that is our main focus on this study, include marshes and true hardwood hammocks, so they are very distinct. And they are home for several endangered species. And these endangered species depend on one major feature, low nutrients. The historical Everglades usually has 10 parts per billion of phosphorus, which means it needs very little nutrients to assure the survival of the species. So to summarize, the Everglades is a unique system that has slow flow, low nutrients, but it has been highly impacted since then, because as you may recognize, this is also our home. Because of high urban population and agriculture, the government started the Central and Southern Florida project for flood control and other purposes in the 40s. This project completely changed the sheet flow that we were talking about before. The current flow is like the middle image, and this, in comparison to the historic flow, you may realize that most of the water has been diverted. This situation inspired several restoration projects in the 90s, which aim to restore the flow as the last image shows. And ideally, once all these projects are concluded, we'll have a flow that respects timing and quantity. By building large reservoirs, we can send enough water south in the right seasons. Distribution, by filling up channels and destroying barriers, the water can go in the right direction. And quality, by implementing best management practices in farms and creating treatment areas for water, we have already reduced the input of nutrients by 80%, but we still haven't reached the 10 ppb standard that the Everglades need. Without the standard being met, we cannot send water south without threatening the Everglades diversity. restoration will improve Everglades health, but the projects have been completed slower than planned, and definitely much too slowly to help Everglades face our next big threat, sea level rise. As CO2 builds up in the atmosphere since the industrial age, temperature in the planet rises, and so does sea level. And it's happening right now at a 0.12 inches a year rate, and this rate is just going up. Predictions show that by 2100, we'll have an increased sea level of 1.6 to 6.6 feet. And you can see in this image how this will affect southern Florida throughout this century. As you can see, by 2100, most of the Everglades National Park is already underwater. We will present further details of how this threat is gonna act on the natural environment, what we can do to help, and how sea level rise makes Everglades restoration more important than ever. Now I'll give you Jacqueline, who will present hurricanes and dead zones with sea level rise.
Hello everyone, my name is Jackie, and I'm going to be discussing the impacts that hurricanes and dead zones will have on the Everglades ecosystem as sea level continues to rise, and then some possible solutions to those problems. Wrong way. Alright. The Everglades, as Hannah showed you, is located in Florida, which is a flat, low-lying, and highly porous peninsula. So already the system is very susceptible to damage from hurricanes. It is projected with sea level rise and climate change that the behaviors of hurricanes, specifically their intensity and their frequency, will be altered, but studies do not all agree on how or to what extent those changes will occur. However, without considering future possible changes of hurricane behavior, sea level rise on its own will clearly amplify the extent of hurricane-related storm surge on coastal areas. This means that you will have more water that is traveling further inland, and it's displayed by the largest figure on the screen. This will, got a little bit of a cough here. This will destroy land habitat and eventually convert it into a marine ecosystem through the process of erosion. So, what can we do to protect the Everglades from this problem? The natural solution is by protecting our mangrove forests, which have a just such an incredible ability to reduce storm surge. And this will protect the interior Everglades area. The engineered solution is to construct seawalls, but these things are very, very controversial because they're expensive and they can destroy habitat. But it's possible that they can also protect our mangrove forests from the full forces of storm surge. Efforts have been made to make these seawalls more habitat friendly, and the result are these habitat enhanced seawalls, which incorporate gentle slopes and small crevices to essentially create habitat. So it's possible that we can use the engineered solution in conjunction with the natural solution to optimize protection of the Everglades ecosystem from storm surge. Another possible challenge with sea level rise in the Everglades is the development of dead zones. Dead zones are areas that are impacted by hypoxia, which is when oxygen levels get so low that life can no longer be sustained. It is expected with sea level rise and climate change that these areas will be enlarged and the effects accelerated. This will be caused by the increased inundation of salt water that will kill freshwater species. It will also amplify the transport of pollution from both urban and agricultural areas. It could exacerbate the already occurring problem of septic tank nutrient pollution and corrode underground storage tanks that hold urban litter. So, how can we solve this problem too? Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do to completely stop it from happening, but there are efforts that can be made to lessen them. This can be done through septic tank mapping and monitoring, through finding more sustainable ways to produce crops while using less nutrients to do so, by implementing more community outreach programs that emphasize the importance of lawn management practices and how the fertilizers that you put on your residential lawns can impact surrounding ecosystems. Also, urban litter control actions should be implemented so these pollutions don't get out of hand. So we're stopping these pollutions before they get out of hand. As always, monitoring programs are an excellent tool to combat really anything in science. And so they allow further research so that we can know the most efficient adaptive and reactive management. So thank you. Now Lacey is going to talk to you about saltwater intrusion and peat collapse.
Thank you, Jackie, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lacey Hanco, and I am going to tell you more about threats sea level rise is bringing to the Everglades Foundation, its soils. Histosols, more commonly known as peat or muck, make up the majority of soils found in the Everglades. They are comprised of organic matter at varying degrees of decomposition and are a dark black color, as seen in this image, due to the carbon that they hold. Inundation, temperature, plant growth, and the soil microorganisms' activity rates are all factors of peat formation. There is over 1 billion microorganisms in just 1 teaspoon of productive soil. They help cycle nutrients and break down the fallen leaves and dead roots in the soil. But once plant production exceeds the rate at which these microbes can digest the leaves and roots in the soil, soils begin to form. Studies show that soils in the Everglades have accumulated, on average, 3 to 10 feet throughout, with areas south of Lake Okeechobee having as much as 13 feet. This is great. More peat soils means higher elevations, more water holding capacities, and better water filtration. However, when the Everglades was drained, most of the major peat-forming factors were lost. Once soils are no longer inundated, soil temperatures increase. Soil microorganisms' activity rates are sped up, and plant growth is no longer enough to allow the soils to build, giving microorganisms more time to eat away at the soil already there. Losing peat is a huge problem for the Everglades because elevation is lost and salt water is able to intrude further into habitats both on the surface and underground. The smaller photo on the screen shows the current flow as seen in the introduction, where fresh water has been diverted to the coast. To keep the saltwater-freshwater interface pushed back, flow of both fresh and salt water must be equal. But because sea levels are rising and we have reduced the freshwater flow south, the balance has been disrupted. In the diagram, you can see this interface between the fresh and the salt water. The black arrows, the salt water, has more pressure and can intrude farther inland. The once freshwater well that used to pump drinking water out of the aquifer is now pumping up salt water. And because Florida has such a high water table, this salt water can eventually reach the root zone. Either from saltwater intrusion, inundation, or storm surge, the freshwater peat soil in the Everglades will become more salty with time. Salt in the root zone stunts plant growth by reducing the plant's ability to suck up water through the roots, by limiting the nutrient availability to the plants, and may even poison the plants, causing them to die. So, initially, plants are going to die. But ultimately what happens is once these roots are no longer there to hold everything together, the soils will crumble and disappear, making low elevations even lower, a feedback loop that will only exacerbate the rate of sea level rise. In order to understand the mechanisms involved with peat collapse and other threats associated with sea level rise, more research must be completed and more monitoring programs should be also completed. Just small changes in the elevation could cause dramatic shifts in the unique vegetation and hydrology of the Everglades. And because the Everglades is already so low lying, any loss of soil is not good. This picture, the largest picture, again seen in the introduction, shows restored flow after completion of all projects. By restoring the freshwater flow south, the groundwater too can have the possibility of returning back to its historic flow. As seen in the diagram, you can see what this historic flow would have looked like. Both fresh and salt water are at equal pressures. In the blue arrows, the fresh water is pushing back the salt water. A well-balanced system where pressures are maintained. Completing all restoration projects and returning the flow south will build more peat soil, increasing elevations. It will essentially flush the salts from the soil, saving the plants, and at the same time, it will restore the pressures underground, pushing back the salt water. Hopefully, this too will help the animals and plants adapt to sea level rise, another threat facing the Everglades, which Trinity Livingston will tell you more about. Habitat loss.
Hi, as Lacey said, my name is Trinity Livingston, and I'm going to talk to you about habitat loss and some of the other effects of sea level rise on the wildlife. All right.
Can you talk louder?
Yes, I can. Is this good?
Better. Project.
All right, cool. All right, one of the more direct effects of sea level rise on the natural environment is habitat loss. As sea level rises, habitat changes. It's going to go from, in the case of the Everglades, it's going to go from a freshwater system to a brackish or a saltwater system, depending on how high the sea level rises. And as you can see in this image here, in 2060, about half of Everglades National Park will be inundated with water. And that's about a little bit over 2 feet of sea level rise. In 2100, almost all of Everglades National Park, and not pictured in this, but most of the greater Everglades area, will be inundated with only 6.6 feet of sea level rise. It's kind of a big deal. And the coastal habitats will be affected first due to their low elevation as well as the close proximity to the ocean itself. Now, naturally, if this was an unaltered system, the plants and animals would follow their habitats as the habitats migrate upland, which in this case is farther up north. But due to habitat fragmentation, as seen in the far image, they can't. there are the canals and the levees that stop this migration inland. And Tamiami Trail is also a significant block because it's right north of Everglades National Park, and it prevents many of the organisms from moving from the park into the northern part of the Everglades. Other effects, well, the other major effect will be the change in salinity. This, as Lacey previously described, is detrimental to a lot of the vegetation because most of the vegetation is not salt tolerant. A lot of it will die. Some of the plants are a little bit more salt tolerant and they will start to grow, but for the most part, it will cause dead zones, as Jackie was explaining to you guys earlier. Another thing is, as the system changed from freshwater to brackish or brackish to saltwater, it will affect the ranges and populations of the small fish, like the mosquito fish pictured over here. And the mosquito fish and other small fishes like that are very important because they connect the plants to the other animals that eat the fish, and then the animals that eat the animals, or that eat the fish. Like all of these lovely creatures that I'm sure we all know and love. So, when that happens, it causes a lot of ecological havoc when the food chains are messed up. And basically it goes to show that salinity is also important. Now, there aren't that many solutions, but here are the ones that we found, and these are all short-term and require human intervention. If there is no human intervention, we will lose more species of plants and animals than we already are going to currently. And nobody wants that. So, one of the best options is to expand and preserve the habitat corridors that we already currently have. This is a map of the corridors that we have right now. As you can see, a lot of it is actually the Everglades area. And with the sea level rise coming in, there needs to be more. These need to be expanded, and there needs to be a higher degree of connectivity between some of the smaller, patchier areas. A last-ditch effort is called ex situ conservation, which is where they take a plant or an animal from its natural environment and you keep it in captivity in either a seed bank or, like this cute little Florida panther cub, in a zoo or a preservation area. It is effective in some ways, but it is limited by reintroductions, which is when you're trying to reintroduce these animals back into the wild. Sometimes they are far too well adapted to living in captivity to survive in the wild, which makes it almost ineffectual in some cases, but generally it has decent results. In situ conservation is where they're trying to help preserve whatever species it is, be it plant or animal, in its situation. So that includes introducing the animals or plants back into their native habitat, preserving natural areas, and trying to increase the populations in the wild. It is difficult to do because they are in fact wild and not much of it can be controlled. So it's limited by the factor of control. Other beneficial actions are the removal of other stressors on the habitat. A really fantastic example of that is invasive species. Invasive species are species that are not native to here and are causing harm on the native species, be it plant or animal. The Brazilian pepper pictured here is an invasive species that many people are familiar with. If we remove them, it'll help the habitat be healthier, and a healthier habitat is better able to adapt on its own to sea level rise and other disturbances. Another very, very important thing is policy changes. Scientists and politicians and policymakers need to be able to communicate so that we can make green policy changes that are both beneficial to the natural environment and humans as well. Okay, so.
Sorry.
All right, as I said, these are short-term actions, and we do need some long-term actions, and maybe some long-term mitigation strategies. And Lexi Liu is going to describe them to you.
talk about the long-term other mitigation strategies. As the introduction said, the reason why sea level is rising is because we put too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So, solution is reduce carbon dioxide, store carbon dioxide. In the Everglades, marshes and mangroves are so important because they have the ability to reduction to the global carbon budget. They can use their stem leaves to do photosynthesis, absorb more carbon. And seagrass is a good example of how to store carbon dioxide. They can attract carbon dioxide to the roots and the soil. If we can protect those wetlands, those carbon dioxide can be stored in the roots and soil forever. What a human can do? There is economic strategy has been proposed. It's cap and trade program. Cap and trade program set a maximum amount of greenhouse emission to reduce greenhouse from the source. It can allow us economic growth at the same time reward efficiency. What else we can do? We can more research should help us to switch to the renewable energy, like solar energy and wind energy, because it doesn't have carbon dioxide emission. Well, sea level is rising now. There is no certainty about how fast, how high it's gonna rising, but the direction is up. What we can do, and it brings us massive, truly massive threat to our Everglades. As we talked about before, intense face storms, deluges, heat collapse, habitat lost. What we can do, there's still hope. There is also a bright side in this situation. We have decades, even centuries, to prepare, to adapt this situation. We have Everglades. We can restore Everglades, let more water go south. We can count wetland vegetations to reduce carbon, to store carbon. We can build habitat corridors, networks, to fix the habitat lost. So right now, Everglades restoration is more important than ever. We don't need to be panic, but we do need to act. Let's take a deep breath. Think about what we can do to help to fix the sea level rise. Well, we can reduce our carbon footprint, choose more environmental friendly transport, or we can save electricity energy, turn off the light. We can also get informed about the Everglades, visit more natural areas, get your feet wet. We can volunteer for the Arthur R. Marshall Foundation. Plant more trees, plant more mangrove trees. Right now, I would like to use time to thank you, Arthur Marshall Foundation, the founders, mentors, the staffs, and the donors, especially the world's best boss, Mary Kreider. Opportunity to study Everglades. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming. Now is question time. If we cannot answer a question today, please email us. I would like to invite all the interns to join me. Thank you.
Ready for questions? On your solution slide, I'm assuming that you put them in a priority that you thought was necessary. It started with studies, then went to finished projects, and then went to send water south. Studies are an obstruction tool used by agriculture for the last 20 years to prevent any progress. I leaned over to see if Governor Scott's signature was on that slide because it was in the same priority that he would give. $5 billion, 30 years, north of the lake, and not a drop is going to get sent south. So the solution, in my opinion, is send the water south first, right? Then perhaps pick and choose those things in like SERP that have not been done, like the storm treatment areas that are killing the St. Lucie estuary and the Indian River Lagoon, and then the studies. Next, you talked about peat, but no one addressed the oxidation of the peat. And what happens in all of the Everglades right now, while it's starved for water because we're not sending it, and the peat is exposed, methylmercury is being created. And if you want to worry about what's happening with the ecosystem, start looking at the methylmercury effects in our bird species and such that are not, they're being interrupted neurologically and they're not behaving. So, I'm sorry, I think you should reconsider the priorities on that other slide, and the next time you do this, you should consider the oxidation issues of the muck, which wasn't addressed at all.
Marty,
I think those are both.
Marty, I can assure you that the order that we presented it had nothing to do with the sequence of which they should be done.
Okay.
However, we did it that way just for it to make more sense to the general public, who may not know as much as you. I did want to include subsidence in the presentation, but the anaerobic, aerobic, explaining that within our time limit is not possible. So, in our paper that we wrote, we do address subsidence. I do write about it, and I know that it's occurring. And that, too, reduces elevations. As I said, any loss of soil in the Everglades is not good. So we just focus on the threats that sea level rise is bringing. So subsidence necessarily is not happening because sea levels are rising. And that's what our focus was.
Let's take a little longer look. 10,000 years ago, look at Florida. Underwater. That may happen again. I'm not saying don't fight, don't give up the fight. I'm just saying is that there are sometimes when you have to take a longer view about be humble about what we can do. I'm supportive of the idea of Everglades ever since I came down here. And I'm very frustrated right now by our political system. So one thing that you didn't mention, and I know it's a terrible organization, but at least we can register.
Oh, of course. Thank you.
Please register. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, right.
Ow.
This question now.
It doesn't matter. I think Dr. Tom? Okay, Dr. Tom first, and then we'll go back there.
Me?
Yes, go ahead.
What do you think about the issue since the nutrients in Lake Okeechobee continue to go up? Since the stormwater treatment plant have never been able consistently, any of them, to get to the consent degree, since we certainly are going to have sea level rise, and a lot of the areas that are low nutrients will be flooded and changed, that we should worry about, as this gentleman said, getting the water south and not worry so much about the nutrients.
Actually, we had discussions between the group about that. Half of us thinks it's a good idea, half of us doesn't think it's such a good idea. One of the problems that we see in that is that ultimately the areas on the Everglades National Park will be inundated. So the species have to move inland. And if we let the water go south with high levels of phosphorus, that will cause the spreading of the cattail and might limit the ability of the species to move inland.
Have to clean the water first.
It will kill the cattails.
The salt water, yes, but the high phosphorus freshwater will create a monoculture of nothing but
So the
cattails.
species that would migrate inland might not be able to migrate because of the spreading of the cattails. So that's a concern, but definitely needs more research and looking more into it. There is a possibility.
This is a question for all of you. What was your biggest challenge doing this research?
Doing the research.
Actually, it was finding the research.
Yeah.
Probably didn't like.
A lot of the studies focus on urban areas, and there's not as much focus on the natural areas. So when you're tasked with finding how sea level rise is going to impact natural areas, there's a limit to how much you can do.
And then the restoration plans, they address mainly not mainly, but they address a lot the urban needs for water and the agricultural needs and our needs, and not as much the natural needs. So it was every 10 papers we would find about urban development, we would find one about the natural environment. So
It's time to write, time for you guys to publish.
I think your idea that, I agree with restoring the water flow to the Everglades. My question is, you showed a map that in 2100, the Everglades is going to be under salt water. So how does increasing the flow at this time mitigate that?
Well, increasing the flow south would push back that saltwater intrusion that we've seen, and it's going to give the time for plants and animals to adapt. Sorry. By giving more fresh water south, it will give time for the plants and animals to adapt because we push back this salt water. So, and not only will that happen, but by inundating the land, as Marty was saying before, that creates a anaerobic environment, so underwater, so less oxygen, which allows the peat soils to build because microorganisms don't work as fast as they would when the water is drained off the Everglades. So if we could build up those peat soils, the elevation is raised, giving elevation. Thank you. Ma'am, all the way in the back.
The other thing too that I think we don't talk about is the flow, the flow head of the water, the actual quantity and velocity of water. And I think that to your question, in the sense of, well, it's all going to be gone, but the only mitigating factor for that is to put a lot of water, a certain amount of volume down south. That's the only way any of that stuff is going to make any difference on the south. If we're just simply going to do a plumbing system and drip the water down to Everglades National Park, I don't think that's going to do anybody any favor.
Hyana did address, she said we need to get the distribution, timing, quality, and quantity, all four. If we can't do all four, then you're absolutely correct.
Restore and clean.
Also, on that note, you have to think about what it is to actually restore an environment or changing it, like completely changing the vegetation, like composition and population. You're not restoring it. You're creating a new environment, and that is not the goal.
You have a question?
As a 7th grade teacher who's looking to give, if not the students, my entire department, a replacement for science fair based on using this and a few other websites competitions, I want to give my students information about this. I want to give my students research about this. Do you know of any good sites or any good resources that I could use that would be accessible to 7th to 8th graders? I understand that's not the kind of resources you'd be using for this necessarily, but where could I go if I wanted to use this with my students?
Mary Marshall. The Marshall Foundation does a lot of educational outreach.
So yes, and so if you go to our exhibit table, actually there is lesson plans, and I actually can get with you after this and talk to you a lot more detail of what programs that we actually have designed specifically for that age group.
We have a copy of the Marshall Plan.
Yes, we'll do that as well.
Great presentation. I look forward to seeing the big report because I know there's a lot more in there. I saw a slide that it said policy. So I'm interested in knowing, and I hope the answer is yes, I'm interested in knowing if you all can tease out of the research that you've done, tease out neutral that's about the whole state, that's about short-term, long-term. Do you see that that's something you could do out of what you gained from your research?
Actually, our paper didn't focus as much in that, but the summer program gave us access to a lot of policymakers, and we personally got to know all of that, but we didn't put it on the paper.
I'll give you a clue. You gotta write it for them. You gotta write it for them, and you gotta back it up, and it looks like you've got the backup. So I encourage you to start writing for them.
Oh, I've been watching so much today. Did you mention mangroves? Because the role of the mangroves.
We have a mangrove enthusiast.
Yes. I mentioned mangroves in the hurricane section because they have the ability to reduce the extent of storm surge. I didn't mention, crossed this off of my notes because I didn't think I had enough time to say it, but they have the ability to build peat, which is someone mentioned. And so that also sequesters the carbon.
I didn't hear that mentioned.
All right, so mangroves, excellent.
Way in the back.
Oh, yeah, thanks. First of all, I want to comment on your boys. You ladies are doing so well. I really hope that I'll stay with this. You're doing great. I'd like to know what you think is the greatest roadblock to implementing proper policy and what needs to be done.
The restoration projects were my part of the research, and it's really hard to understand what is the major roadblock because the plan is done. We kind of know what to do, but we haven't done anything yet. I mean, the last report said, a 2015 paper said that only one project of the 68 projects observed has been completed.
Wow.
So, and it's 15 years later, and we still only completed one project. There are 6 on the way, I think, and a few others being researched. But it's complicated, especially because of the lack of federal funds. State funds that have been a lot greater than the federal funds, and of course the state funds kind of go more to the projects that bring benefits to the urban use and the agricultural use because that's their interest. The federal funds would be used more for. But the SAP project might be the solution. It's going to be approved this year, I believe, with results, with completion scheduled for 2022. So we hope it works.
So water stays out till 2022, right?
I just wanted to comment that the 5 of you seem like you make a really good team together, and I also was very impressed with your presentation and your poise and how you presented your material. And what my question is in your, I don't know how long your internship goes, but do you have plans to present the same presentation to other groups, say like young people at the at the foundation, or you know what I mean? Do you have plans to do this again?
This is the last day of our internship. But earlier we were able to talk to some summer camp, like science summer camp kids, and that was for me a little scary, but overall pretty fun. So yeah, we got to participate in some of the educational outreach, and even though our internship ends, I think it's inspired all of us to pursue this. Absolutely.
Where do you go back to?
Brazil.
Unemployment.
John?
Since 3 of you are from the University of Florida, I'm wondering if you got a chance to really dig into the Yuba Negron study, because it had a lot of material in it in doing your research.
We looked at it. Yeah, we did read it and we have cited it in our papers. The diversion of water from the Everglades to the coast and the impacts it has on the estuaries was not the focus of the paper, so we did a lot of research on the Everglades. We did use his background in research in our paper, but to understand the complete all pages of it. Sorry.
We'll take one more question back there. Janet, you're
Now knowing all the vast amount of knowledge that you know and having done the project that you've done, have you thought about what next project you would like maybe the next year's interns to do, or what, if you could do it again, you would take as your next step in the research?
There was one that Hayana mentioned the other day that I think is very interesting.
So I'm an oceanographer, so I'm biased. I would love to see more about the estuaries, about how the Everglades restoration and the maintenance of the estuaries health is going to work. So maybe that's an idea for next year's.
Yeah, that'd be perfect to study. That would go hand in hand.
Two more quick comments and then we're going to wrap up. So
I ask this question every year. Has your career path ideals changed because of your summer experience?
Yes.
What did he say? What did he say?
one more quick comment and we're going to round it. The comment is, I met these girls right at the beginning of their internship and I'm just blown away. I'm so proud of how this is going.